Hey folks, welcome to week 9 of DMD 105 Digital Design Foundations. How's everybody doing? Alright, hopefully you've been practicing a lot with Adobe Illustrator. You guys had your pieces, parts, pieces assignment to be working on. So you've been working with a lot of geometric shapes in Illustrator and constructing them and combining them and altering them and turning them into something that they were not originally. So now this week, in week 9, we are going to shift over to drawing in Illustrator. Now, don't panic. A lot of times people hear drawing in Illustrator and the first thing they think is, wait a minute, I don't know how to draw. How am I supposed to draw in Illustrator? And that's okay. Wherever your drawing skills are is perfectly fine for what we're doing here. You do not have to be Rembrandt to learn how to do some basic drawing in Illustrator. Naturally, however advanced your drawing skills are, will translate to the digital environment at some point. And there are, of course, some input tools that can make life easier. So, for example, if you are working on your trackpad on your laptop, or if you're using a mouse on either your desktop or your laptop, those are not the most optimal tools for drawing digitally. A lot of times people will use a light pen system, something like the Wacom tablets would be preferable. But if you don't have one of those, that's okay. You can still do some basic drawing using either the trackpad or the mouse. And really, the main thing we're going to do this week is get to know the pen and the pencil tool, which are the two major drawing tools in Illustrator. Now, of course, there are brush tools for digital painting over in Photoshop, and we looked at those briefly when we did Photoshop, and that's sort of a different way of creating freehand than drawing. Of course, drawing tends to be more of a linear type expression, whereas painting is more of a brushstroke type expression. But regardless, they do have their similarities. So we're going to work with the pen and pencil tool. Now, there's a lot of consumables this week to sort of help you out. I'm going to demonstrate some stuff right now. We'll demonstrate stuff again a little later in the week. But in the meantime, there are lots of tools here for you to explore that can help you out. So back over on Adobe's website, we have 4 lessons that you can follow. Get to know the drawing tools, creating with drawing tools, start creating with the pen tool, and edit paths you draw. All of these link out to these great Adobe pages. And just like the last ones we looked at, you can download the practice files here, which will download a zip file to your computer and will allow you to follow along with this video and follow the practice as given to you. Now, they're each pretty short, right? So there's not a ton to do, but it really sort of gives you a good preface for getting to know the drawing tools. This one is creating with drawing tools, same process. And I will admit that there is some redundancy between some of these lessons, but that's okay. Doing things over and over again or doing the same thing different ways when you are learning something new is never a bad idea. Because you might not learn it the first way, but you might pick it up better the second way, right? This here is creating with the pen tool, talks about the use of anchor points and whatnot. You make a cool looking alien, and you can sort of go from there. And then the last one is editing paths after you draw them. So we're going to look at all of those things right now, but you should probably definitely take part in some of these lessons as well. Then below that, there's a great video to consume, which is Learn to Draw Anything in Adobe Illustrator. It's a really super useful video. It's very immersive. I would suggest doing these lessons first before you get into the video, because the video moves along pretty quickly and the lessons you can take your time with. The other thing is there's a handout in the Week 9 folder called Drawing Basics, which is this one here, which gives you even more lessons to follow if you would like. These are sort of additional lessons beyond those original ones. If you feel as though you've become comfortable with the pen and the pencil tool with the previous lessons, then don't worry about this handout. You don't want to confuse yourself. But as the screenshot shows you, there are lots of tools related to drawing in Illustrator. And as you can see here with the close-up of this illustration, you can get pretty detailed in Illustrator through lots of practice. And so there's a lot to learn. We are just introducing the concept of drawing in Illustrator this week, so I don't really expect everybody to be fabulous at it, but certainly dive into it as much as you can and really take a lot of time practicing with it. The pen tool in particular requires a lot of practice to really get comfortable with it, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Also supplied to you this week in the Week 9 folder is this folder of practice images, which you can click on and download to your computer. And these are them here. There are 3 of them. There's 3 different ones, and they go from easy to medium to difficult. This one is an ice cream cone. The This one here is a Day of the Dead skull, a sugar skull from Dia de los Muertos. And this here is a Mandela pattern. Each of these are meant for you to trace in Illustrator. Sometimes tracing somebody else's line drawing while you're learning how to use the tools is probably the easiest way to get comfortable drawing with the tools. So I'm going to show you in a second how to place one of these into Illustrator and then trace over it as if you are tracing through a piece of tracing paper. Okay, so we'll do that in a second. And you can start with whichever one you want, but generally people start with the cone first because it's pretty easy, and then make their way up through the three of them. So this week you are really expected to practice with the tools, either through the various lessons, watching the video, and the practice images that I gave you. Okay, we do have homework for the week, but we'll talk about that later on in the week. And of course, your final version of Pieces, Parts, Pieces, Project 2 is due at the end of the week, has to be uploaded to Canvas, but we'll talk about that later in the week as well, but just keep that on your radar. Okay, so let's hop over into Illustrator and we'll take a look. So I just have a 16-inch by 16-inch artboard already set up, ready to rock and roll. And I just want to sort of show you these tools freeform to show you sort of how they work. Now, the first thing you want to do before you start drawing is to address the color picker, because when you're drawing linearly, you really want to focus just on the line for now, and you can deal with filling in color later on, right? So naturally, the color picker by default usually has a color in the fill and a color in the stroke. So all we really care about right now is the stroke. So I'm going to choose the fill color and go down here and click the universal symbol for none and take the color out of the fill, right? That comes in handy when you're trying to draw. The other thing I tell people to do, just as a good rule of thumb when you're learning the pen or the pencil tool, is to switch the stroke color from black over to something really bright. Now, the reason why I say to do that is because it makes the line easier to see when you're trying to learn how to draw with it. So I'm just going to make it this bright red color. You can do whatever you want, whatever color you'd like, but I find that it works better that way. Now, the pen tool itself is up here at the top of the toolbox. There are two that look similar to each other. One is the curvature tool, and then the other is the pen tool. You specifically want the pen tool, okay? Now, underneath the pen tool, if you hold it down, you'll see that there are three other related tools. There's the Add Anchor Point tool, the Delete Anchor Point tool, and just the plain old Anchor Point tool. They are all related to using the pen tool, and we will learn how to use those too as the week goes on. Now, note that the icon for the pen is an old-fashioned metal nib pen, right? It's that kind of nib pen that you would have historically dipped into a little jar of ink and then written with. Now, it's an interesting representation because, of course, in real life, we probably haven't written with those types of nib pens in many, many years. In fact, I would dare say that many of you have never even seen one in person. And yet, this remains the visual representation of a pen tool. Because, of course, modern pens, ballpoint pens, just look like a triangle at the end of a rectangle, and so they're not super interesting visually. So we can have a long discussion later in the week about scufomorphism and the visual representation of physical objects, but we're not going to do that right now. So when you choose the pen tool, you'll see that your cursor, of course, turns into that very same icon, and there's a little asterisk to the right of it that tells you that it's active and is about to become a drawing tool. Now let's look at our palettes. Your tool-specific menu, which is up at the top here, of course, gives you access to certain things like the fill and the stroke if you want to change it on the fly. The weight of the line, the stroke weight, it always defaults to 1 point, which is a good place to start, but I'm actually going to increase it to 3 points just so we can see it better on the screen, but you can make it whatever you want. You can also change the personality of the stroke. Remember, we did this with the shapes. As opposed to just a uniform line, you can make a curved line that has sort of thick and thin parts to it. And you can change the type of pen that you're using from these various shapes up top and a few specialty ones at the bottom, including this sort of charcoal line. But we want to stick with just a plain old regular round pen. You can also adjust the opacity of the stroke, which we're not going to bother with right now. And of course, a lot of this functionality repeats itself over here in the Properties panel, which you should have up and running too. which allows you to make some adjustments to the line as you're going, okay? Now, let's talk about the basic functionality. The first thing you do with the pen tool is if you click anywhere on the screen once, it drops an anchor point, right? That blue square, which of course is an anchor point. Now, you've seen anchor points before because when we were creating those geometric shapes last week, each one of them is made up by a collection of anchor points at every turn, right? At every angle. And so what we're doing here is instead of the anchor points being created for us through the creation of the geometric shape, we are instead drawing a line, and every time we click on the screen, we're dropping another anchor point into the page. It's kind of like having pins on a pegboard, and you're just dropping a pin in the pegboard, and then you go ahead and drop another one, and so on and so forth. Now, once you drop an anchor point, if you move your cursor away from it, you'll see that this blue wire kind of extends from it. Now, I haven't done anything else with the mouse other than clicked once to make that anchor point. So this is sort of like a flexible wire that's extending from that anchor point, which shows you where the line is going to go if I were to go ahead and click again and create another anchor point, okay? Also, you'll notice that it shows you the length of the line in the floating numerical box to the right of the anchor. To the right of the icon. So it's 6 1/4 inches and so on and so forth. So it tells you how long you're making the line, which can be useful to you. So if I go ahead and click somewhere again, I drop another anchor point, and now the line solidifies. And because I chose red as my stroke color, I now have that red line, and then I have a second anchor point, and now I get that blue wire back again. So I click again, and again, and again, and again. And in this way, you can draw pretty much whatever you want using a collection of straight connected lines, right? Now, watch what happens if I go back to my very first anchor point where I began. When I hover over that, you'll see a little circle pops up to the right of the icon, and that tells me that I am back to the beginning, and if I click again, I'm going to close the shape, right? Now, closing the shape is important because once you do that and you've finished it, now, remember, rule of thumb, go back over to your black selection arrow, and click that, and now a bounding box appears around that shape that I just made, and it's treated like a regular shape. Just like those geometric shapes we were working with last time, now that I've gone ahead and created it using the pen tool, I can resize it, I can stretch it again, I could rotate it, all of the ability that I had with the regular geometric shapes I can do with this odd shape that I created, right? And of course, you can see that simply by selecting it, that blue sort of wire that holds the whole thing together is still there. Now, even though I started out by drawing it with a red stroke and no fill, just like any other shape, now that I've finished drawing it, I can go change that. So if I want to fill it with a color, I can do that. If I want to change the stroke color, I can do that. If I want to make the stroke color fatter or thinner, I can do that as well. So you can treat it like you did all the other geometric shapes we dealt with last week. The only difference is you drew it yourself, right? So that's one way to handle the pen tool, just a collection of straight lines to draw whatever you want, right? Okay, so that's one way to do it. Let's look at the other way to deal with the pen tool. So I'm going to go back and reset everything. I'm going to put this back to no fill, and we're going to put this back to a red line just so I have a good view of it, and we'll put this down to 3 points. Okay, now the other way to do it is this. You start by clicking once, and then you drop in your anchor point, and then I've got my free floating wire. But now for the next anchor point, I'm not just going to click. I'm going to click, and with the mouse button pushed down, I'm going to drag, and that creates a curved line. Right? Kind of cool. So now in creating the curved line, I can move my mouse around while I'm still holding down the mouse button, and I can sort of define what that curve looks like. It can be a deep curve, it can be a narrow curve, it can be an inversed curve, whatever you want. And notice, of course, that there's these two handles that are emanating out from the middle of that second anchor point. Those are control handles, which we'll be able to work with later in a second. Now, once you finish doing that, you let go, and then watch what happens to that next wire. It has a curve built into it already, right? Because I started with a curve, and now it will continue with a curve. So if I wanted to, I could make this next one, and again, click and drag, click and drag, click and drag, and so on and so forth. And I'm creating a collection of curved lines that, again, when I go back to the beginning, I get that little circle next to my icon here, click it, and now I've made a closed shape again, back to the black selection arrow. But now instead of it being a collection of straight lines, it's a bunch of curved lines, right? Kind of neat. So you can make a curved shape. And of course, similarly, you can change the fill and the stroke, resize it, etc., just like you can any other shape, right? So that's a curved shape. Now, other stuff you can do with the pen tool is you can alter what your shape looks like after you've gone ahead and made it using some of those sister tools that live underneath the pen tool. These guys here. So let's take a look at that. So we're going to go back to a straight edged shape. So I'm going to use my pen tool again and click, 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 and just go ahead and make an oddball shape like that. Now, once that's done, you remember from last time with the more standard geometric shapes that I can grab my direct select tool, which is the white arrow, and I can hover over any of the anchor points and then go ahead and alter where they are to change the shape of the thing that I made, right? So that's good. It works just like a regular shape and you can alter it. But the other thing you can do is some of these tools that live underneath the pen tool, add anchor point and delete anchor point, allow you to do exactly what it says you can do. If we grab the add anchor point tool, now you'll see a little plus symbol pops up next to the pen icon, and I can go to any of these paths, right, and hover over it. It'll say path, and then click, and I can drop a new anchor point there, and click, I can drop a new anchor point there, and click, so on and so forth. And that gives me the ability to then pick up these new anchor points and further edit the shape however I want. But now what if I want to get rid of some of these anchor points? If I want to change the shape and get rid of a couple of them? Well, you do the opposite. You go back over to the collection of pen tools from the toolbox, go down to delete anchor points, hover over any anchor you want, like say this one, click it, and it deletes it. And you can delete as many anchor points as you want, which will alter the shape. So if you want to change those, you can. Perfect. Now, another thing you can do here is that last tool in the collection of pen tools is the anchor point tool. Looks like a caret, right? It's just sort of a triangle without a bottom. This allows you to hover over an anchor point tool and convert a straight line to a curved line. What do I mean? Let's hover over the anchor point tool, click and drag, and now you can convert those two straight lines into a couple of curved lines, see? And then when I let go, boom, they are now curved. And there's those control handles again, right? So I can grab those by the control ball at the end, and then that allows me to continue to make adjustments to the shape based on that. So I can convert straights to curves, and you can do the opposite. If you have curved lines and you want to revert them back to straight, you simply hover over the anchor point and click once, and they go back to being straight lines again. So this magical little tool here, this caret tool, converts curved lines to straight lines to curved lines, and then allows you to use the adjustment handles to make some fine tuning of it, right? Pretty great. Drag that out, make a curve, sort of go from there. Now, as fun and interesting as this is, as you can probably tell by working with these, it does require a fair amount of practice to really get the pen tool and the collection of related pen tools to do what you want them to do, right? And ultimately, you're going to be using a combination of the direct select tool and these four pen tools, the regular pen tool, the add anchor, the delete anchor, and the anchor point tool, to really kind of fine-tune your drawing and make it the way you want. Meaning that don't expect that your drawing is going to come out perfect the first time. You're going to draw it to the best of your ability and then go in and make some adjustments to it, right? So that's all pretty great. Okay, moving on. Let's take a look at the pencil tool. Pencil tool should live right underneath your shape tools. Of course, we looked at those last week, right? That's where the shape tools live. So the pencil tools live right underneath. There are a variety of pencil tools, just like there's a variety of pen tools. We're going to start with the regular old pencil tool here, just the second one down. But there's also the shaper tool, the smooth tool, the eraser tool, and the join tool, and they're all related to the pencil tool, right? Now, actually, first I'm going to get rid of the shape here. There we go. So go back to the pencil tool. And of course, when you choose the pencil tool, again, you have some adjustments that are available to you in the tool-specific menu, as well as the properties palette. They are the same adjustments you have for the pen tool. So again, I'm going to increase the stroke size just so we can see it better. Now, the pencil tool, unlike the pen tool, is completely for free-form drawing. So the pen tool, you can either make a collection of straight lines or a collection of curved lines and then connect them to make a drawing or a shape or whatever you want. The pencil tool allows you to just sort of free form it. So you simply grab the pencil tool, start by clicking, and then just draw with your mouse or whatever input device you have, and you can draw completely freehand. Now, unlike the pencil tool, you can't really go back to the beginning and connect without really hovering over it and get that little circle. So you can connect it. So when you let go, it becomes a finished shape, but you'll notice that I can just draw it however I want. Curved lines, straight lines, whatever. And then you might have noticed there's a little bit of a pause there when you let go of the mouse, and that is Illustrator taking a second to sort of take your squiggly line that you just made and try to smooth it out a little bit and make it as readable as possible. And notice how it drops a ton of anchor points throughout the whole thing. Now, at this point, you go back to your black selection arrow, and again, it's treated just like any other shape. You can resize it, you can rotate it, everything else. But the best part of it is that all of those little anchor points are completely editable. So again, if you were to grab your direct selection arrow, the white one, and hover over any of these anchors, I can now go ahead and customize that squiggle however I want. I can fine-tune it by adjusting the control handles. I can pick up anchors and move them. I can totally customize this, and I can even combine what I'm doing with some of the functionality from the pen tool. So I could go back to the pen tool collection and go to the delete anchor point tool, for example, and delete some anchor points just like I did with drawing with the pen tool. Remember, the tools are interchangeable, similar to how the selection tools in Photoshop are interchangeable, right? You're all just trying to make marching ants in Photoshop. Here, we're just trying to make lines, and so as long as you've got paths and anchors, you can use any of these tools. So I can go back to the pen tool collection and delete some anchors if I want. I can go back to the anchor point tool and use that to turn curved lines to straight, turn straight lines to curved, and vice versa, and go around and make adjustments and fine-tune things. So I have complete control over this with the pencil tool. Now, the other thing you can do with the pencil tool is underneath the pencil tool, we have the smooth tool. You can grab that, and what this allows you to do, and again, there are some adjustments up here you can adjust to as you're going. But if you take the smooth tool and you kind of just drag it around what you've already drawn, it will reconfigure it. So I have this very sharp edge here, for example. If I kind of draw around that, it curves it for me. Draw around that, it'll curve it for me a little more. Draw around here, around here. So this kind of allows you to fine-tune the line without using the direct selection arrow or the pen tools. This allows you to sort of draw in some adjustments. And, you know, again, it requires a certain amount of practice. You can also just click on certain anchors and it will sort of reformat them a little bit. So you can practice with the smooth tool to do that. Now, I'm just drawing squiggles here, but of course, if you can draw something and you want to draw something, you can simply grab the pencil tool and just start doodling, right? You could just start sort of drawing something in based on what you're looking at. And so you could draw something from memory, draw something based on what you're seeing, or just doodle something in general so that you have kind of a sketch of something, sort of like this. And just be careful not to overlap existing lines because you'll sort of redraw them by accident, which is sort of what I just did there, but you get the idea. And you know, you can just sort of draw something in a little bit, little doodle, doodle, doodle. And mind you, I'm doing this with a mouse, so that's kind of like drawing with a bar of soap. So not the most accurate thing in the world, but it sort of gives you a place to start drawing some stuff in and doing a little doodle. Hey, look, it's a guy. So you get the idea. So certainly you can sketch with this, you can draw out some ideas, and then of course once you're finished with it, this collection of lines can then be lassoed, and you can group them together, and now you have sort of a drawing that you can treat as one singular object and kind of go from there. Okay, next let's talk about those practice images. Now practicing with the pen tool and the pencil tool is really important, and so for this we need the layers palette, right? So I'm going to grab the layers palette. I'm actually going to pick it up and move it over here so you can see it better. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take one of those practice images that I gave you, the ice cream cone, the Mandela, or the Day of the Dead skull, and you're going to drop it onto your page. So we'll talk a little bit about how that works and what we're doing with it. So once you've downloaded those files, remember where you put them, and you're going to go to File and Illustrator, and then you're going to go to Place, which is Shift-Command-P is the keyboard command. And then once you go to Place, give it a second to access your file manager, and then you can navigate to where you saved those. So let's see here, go over to, back it up, go over to Teaching, Franklin Pierce, My Classes, 105, Week 9, Practice Images. Okay, so I'm going to grab the ice cream cone right here, and then just hit Place, and it's going to load up your cursor with the ice cream cone, and we're going to drop it in place. Now the image of the ice cream cone is bigger than the piece of paper that I have here, so make sure to grab your magnifying glass, and you can zoom out so you can see everything, and then grab your direct selection tool, hold down your shift key so you don't squish it, and then resize your ice cream cone so that it fits onto the paper you're working with, okay? And then drop that in the middle there. Now, once you've dropped it in, you'll see that there is a blue X that runs through the middle of it. And this means that that image is connected to your Photoshop document, but it's not actually placed or embedded onto the paper. We want to make sure it stays there permanently. So over here in the Properties palette, you'll see that there's an Embed button. And if you have your tool-specific menu open at the top, you'll also see the Embed button lives up there too. So click that, and what that does is it places it permanently into your file. So now this image is here on the piece of paper, and I'm going to be able to trace it. Now to trace it, you need a couple of different layers, and we want to lock down this layer. So let me zoom in a little bit just so you can see this better. And then over here in your Layers palette, it's real simple. Grab your black selection arrow, go over to your Layers palette, and you're going to double click on the little thumbnail of the layer that the ice cream cone is living on, or whatever image that you placed there. And you double click on that, and it opens up the Layer Options palette. And here it allows you to not only rename it, which I could have done from here just by clicking on the name, but either way, we'll call this ice cream cone. And I could change the color of the layer if I want to, but that's not super important. The main thing is you want to check off right here where it says template, and that will lock down the layer so that I can't move the cone picture by accident. It dims the image to 50%, and you can always go back and adjust this if that doesn't work for you. But what it does when you hit OK is it gives the effect as if you just put a piece of tracing paper over the image, right? You guys remember doing that? Probably when you were kids, putting tracing paper over images and then tracing it. So this gives us a chance to practice. Now you'll notice over here in the Layers palette that it put a square, a rectangle rather, next to the layer as opposed to the eyeball. This tells me that it is in fact a template. Also, the title has been italicized. Now you're going to make a new layer to put on top of it so you can actually draw over it. So I'm going to grab the New Layer button and click that, and then that gives me a place to go ahead and start doing my drawing. Now, of course, you can zoom in and get working and not worry about moving the ice cream cone picture by accident because it's locked down and it's a template. Now, of course, you can go back to your pen tool and start drawing it. Now, the goal here, right, and again, I still think it's a great idea to start with a color that is just so loud you can't miss it, right? And maybe work with a 1-point stroke. But the goal here is to draw each of these lines to replicate this. However, make sure that you are treating everything as an exact shape, meaning that some things you can't see all of it. So for example, the ice cream itself that's sitting on the top here, logic will tell you that the ice cream continues behind the cherry, but we can't see that line, right? But you need to draw that line so that you can have a complete shape. What do I mean? Well, if I were to start here and start drawing, and again, you can do this with a combination of curved lines and straight lines, right? So we'll curve that. And again, this takes a lot of practice, so don't get frustrated if it takes you a while. Now I want to reverse direction, right? So right now the curved line, you can see it's going to curve down or it's going to curve up. It doesn't do me a whole lot of good. I need it to curve this way. So to change the direction of your curve, simply hover over your final anchor point until you get the little caret symbol next to the pen. Click once, and then that shuts off the curve, and now I can start again in a new direction. So now since I can't see behind the cherry, I'm going to estimate where it is and click and drag and get that curve to work. And then I am going to, again, click on the anchor to disconnect the curve, so I'm back to a straight line, and then click and drag this one out. There we go. And then this one. And then again, I'm going to have to reverse direction, so click the anchor point, and then back to the beginning, and boom, done. So now I've created a shape, so now if I want the ice cream to be a solid shape, there it is. I've got a solid shape that represents the ice cream, which is great. Now I can go back and go from there. Now remember, you don't necessarily have to just rely on the pen or the pencil tool just because they're the new tools we just learned. We already learned some shape tools. So the cherry is a perfect circle. So of course, why would I not just go back and grab the ellipse tool and just try to make it from there? Just make a circle and use that to represent the cherry, right? Why try to do that freehand when I can just use an existing shape like that? So now I've got the cherry ready to go. And so on and so forth. And then just keep going until you have the whole thing traced out. Now, of course, not all of these lines need to be complete shapes. Like these curves here that represent sort of the bumpiness of the ice cream, those are just curves. Those don't need to be complete shapes because they're not, right? So when you're done making a shape like that, the wire is still attached. So there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can hit the escape key on your keyboard a couple of times, and then that will disconnect the wire. So now I can just sort of go back to drawing, right? So that's one way to do it. And then the other thing you can do when making a complete line and you want to disconnect that extra wire that's hanging on there is you can hold down the Option key on your keyboard and click once, and that also disconnects it. So either way, whatever works for you, you can do that. So click and drag. Now some curves you'll notice you have to do in two strokes, right? Now, even though this second line is not perfect, I'm going to go back and adjust it later. Remember, you can always make adjustments with the handle, right? Okay, and then again, I want to get rid of that wire, and I'm good to go. So I could go back now and grab my anchor point tool, and then grab the handle here, and just adjust that curve so that it's right, okay? All right, so that's what you're going to do. You're going to trace out a bunch of these, right? Start with the ice cream cone. Take your time with it. Be patient with yourself. It's going to take practice. And then make a good drawing of it. You can fill it in with color if you want. You can change the stroke weights, obviously change the color of the strokes, whatever you need to do. So the goal this week, practice, practice, practice with the pen tool and the pencil tool, and you can use a combination of them as well as the shape tools that you've already learned to draw different things. Practice with the lessons over here, and then go ahead and use those images I gave you to do some tracing and practicing. And for fun, just freehand draw some stuff. Just get used to the tools. All right, so I will see you guys soon. Get drawing. Have some fun with it. Have a good day.